The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual life. The radical, fundamental. This is the Yaron Brooks Show.
All right, everybody, welcome for this Sunday afternoon. Hope you're having a great weekend. Today is our Q&A show with our show top supporters, and we will also be taking super chat questions. Thank you, Daniel, for making some super chat contributions already. I really appreciate that. And we already got our first question on super chat, which I'll get to later. Let's see. I did want to. I forgot to say this yesterday, but I did want to give everybody, before we get started, a quick update on Leonard Peikoff, because I know a lot of you were concerned, and but I saw him a week ago. It was Sunday, exactly a week ago. I was at his house, and he was doing fine. I mean, he gets tired a lot, and he's on oxygen all the time, so he walks around with an oxygen thing. But other than that, you know, while I was there, full of energy, we had a great conversation. I probably spent, I don't know, 4 hours there. We had dinner, we chatted. It was a lot of fun, and yeah, it was great to see him. The first time I've seen him since he got out of the hospital, and he seemed, for the most part, fine. He said he was still very weak, and mind was a little foggy, but mind wasn't foggy when he was talking to me. So that is the good news on the Leonard Peikoff front. All right, let's jump right in. And as you know, the way this works is I'm going to take questions, one question. We're going to do a round of questions from those live on with me on video, and then we're going to go to the super chat if there are any super chat questions, and then we'll bounce back and forward. So we're going to start off with Jennifer.
Did you say that you didn't like the word hope? Did you say that once?
Did I say that I don't like the word hope? I don't remember saying that, but I can tell you that kind of Leonard once told me, I think I said, I hope this or that. And he said, I don't like the word hope. Now, it was an informal conversation, so I don't know how formal this is, but basically hope is, I mean, what's the point, right? I mean, it's putting your wishes out there. It's unconnected to reality. It's you're hoping for this and that. And what are you going to do about it is the real issue. So, you know, while I still use it because I think it expresses something, it expresses a intention, orientation as something, but living with hope, hoping for something, just sitting around hoping, that kind of passivity is, I think, what I would object to, or what Leonard, I think, was referring to. So it was kind of the placing of emotion above doing something about it, or having a kind of a realistic view of actually what is going to happen. That makes sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, you should obviously try to do something if you can, but sometimes you can't. So then hope would be all you'd have. But it's the last thing.
It's like praying, right? I'm hoping. Okay, well, so what? What is that change in the universe? It doesn't change anything, right? It doesn't have an impact in any kind of way. It represents it's wasted energy in some sense, like praying, and it comes, I think, from that kind of religious context.
Thank you.
Sure. Matt, I think this is your first time on, is that right?
Yes, it is my first time.
All right, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been a passive ARI supporter for several years, but I'm finally ready to make the effort to become more involved. And some of that was motivated by I'm about to become a father. So it just occurred to me that I want to clarify my own ideas and instincts. So I have this new person joining me with a fresh start. So I'd like to get him or her, just with the right mental footing, start going into their life.
Sure, that's great. That's great.
Yeah. So I wanted to start off with something I thought of and I think is true, and see your thoughts on it. It was so many things in the world as it is today, that I find to be immoral and from an objectivist point of view. But it occurred to me that it seems my observation that most people want to be moral. Most people try to be moral. They just have the wrong moral code, something like altruism or some religion. I thought that was a positive sign for the future that most people, it seems like they do have the intention to be moral.
Yes, I think absolutely. I think human beings need morality. They need guidance. They need to know what's right and wrong. They want that. The challenge with altruism is, and they want to be moral, and then they are confronted by altruism, which doesn't really give them guidance and doesn't really advance their life. And then so many of them become cynical or skeptical or abandon, not completely abandon morality, but kind of wing it and become more pragmatic. And again, most people are split, are divided. They have some self-interest in them, and they couldn't live otherwise. They pursue certain values rationally. Again, they couldn't survive if they didn't. They have this nagging altruistic thing in the back of their head that says, but you should be doing this, which results, unfortunately, in guilt and in voting in very bad ways and other things like that. And then they have a part of them that kind of tries to get away with stuff because they know their morality is not practical. And I've always thought this is our in, right? I think the in objectivism has is, hey, wouldn't you like to have a morality that's actually practical? Wouldn't you want a morality that actually leads to success and happiness, where you don't have to feel guilty for doing things that actually promote your own life? I think at the end of the day, that is our strength, and it's what we should be advocating. But it's still very hard to yank people away from the altruism. Particularly, altruism has done a phenomenal job, not only presenting people with the idea that theirs is the only morality, but also with straw manning selfishness. I mean, I was I did this debate with Mackey, John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, on Thursday, and John Mackey's a smart guy, a very successful entrepreneur, a nominally pro-capitalist, right? Considers himself a libertarian, pro-capitalist. Has been exposed to objectivism, has read Ayn Rand, and the whole time he was strawmanning selfishness and strawmanning the objectivist ethics. And here's a guy who, by every measure, should know better, and obviously a smart guy, a thinker, right? He couldn't be as successful as he is without that. Exposed to it directly from Ayn Rand and through people like John Allison, and yet he's still strawmanning it. It's still true that objectivists don't care about other people, and selfishness is about, being nasty to other people and doing horrible things. And it just was bizarre. So, but that's the challenge that we're indeed facing. So it's hard. It's hard to get the altruism out of them. Thanks, Matt. Darius.
Thanks, Yaron. So you just touched on the question I had. I was going to ask you, or I want to ask you, what were the highlights of that debate? I haven't been able to see it yet. I don't think it's available yet anywhere. What was sort of what are you most proud of from that debate, and what were the biggest challenges?
Well, the highlight was that I won. That's the highlight, right?
That's great. Congratulations.
So everybody
Thank you.
votes on the proposition before the debate,
Yeah.
and then after the debate, and you win based on how much change there is, which direction the change happens. And there was a significant, it wasn't small, a significant change to my side.
That's terrific. Yeah.
And
and it's not easy, because I know you had a tough years back, you had a tough one against Gene Epstein on the same Soho
I
forum.
lost that one, but that one was.
But it was also kind of on the same topic at the end of the day, kind of altruism and.
Yeah, so here I try to avoid a direct discussion of egoism and altruism. I really try to focus this on profit, on what is the role of a business. And I try to, my argument was the purpose of business is to make money in the context of a clearly defined mission, call it purpose or whatever, mission, you know, where the management and employees were really committed to that mission. But the mission is there to create a context in which you pursue profit. Because if you just said the job of the business is to pursue profit, where, you know, in what field, how, should they go into finance when they're a grocery store? Should they, you know, if they're, what should they do? The mission is supposed to narrow the scope, focus your attention on that area where you're going to make money, right? Where you're going to make the profit. So, and for him, yeah, profit is good. Profit is fine. You've got to make profit in order to survive. And he kept going back to, I think profit is moral, but when he actually talked about it, he kept saying, I think you have to make money in order to survive. So the purpose of profit was the survival, not any value the profit represented, right? And I kept going back to, no, profit is a reflection of the real value you've created, right? Profit is the market reflecting to you how much value you created, right? You profit by taking inputs, labor, capital, material, knowledge, all of that, taking all those inputs, paying for them, and then putting them together in a way that creates something that people are willing to buy for more money than you paid for those inputs. Right? And that represents the value on a societal scale, if you will, that you have created. Right? You've created a value for people that exceeds the value of the inputs by X. And that's the profit. So it's an indication of value. And he didn't really, he couldn't object to that, right? And so he kept going around by saying, yes, but it's also important that we take care of stakeholders and we take care of this. And I said, yeah, I mean, if you're maximizing shareholder wealth, it doesn't mean you chain the employees to their machines and whip them 3 times a day, or you don't ever pay your suppliers. On the contrary, you treat your employees in ways that maximize their productivity, and you treat your suppliers in ways that maximize your relationship with them in order to make a profit, right? In order to maximize shareholder wealth. And profit is long-term profit. It's economic profit, not financial profit, not the accounting profit, which is a tricky concept. So I thought it went well. It's a hard topic to talk about, particularly with somebody like Mackey who doesn't. It's hard to debate somebody who won't, where the disagreement is not sharp, where the disagreement is soft, and they won't acknowledge exactly where it is. Oh, I agree with you on everything about profit, but. And the disagreement is a shift of focus, right? That's hard versus somebody who thinks, no, profit is exploitation or something like that, which is in a sense a lot easier to debate. You know, he starts off his presentation with the same kind of arguments I start off my presentations with. Look how amazing capitalism has performed. Look at all the wealth it's created. Look at the life expectancy, same charts he uses and all that. And then he says, we've got a real PR problem. And the PR problem is that nobody likes capitalism. Same thing I say. Right? And I say the reason is because of morality. And he says the reason is because of morality. And he says the reason is because we don't show people why capitalism fits their morality, their altruistic morality. Instead, we act like the stereotype of selfishness. And I say, no, it's because capitalism doesn't fit altruism. And we need to reject the stereotype of altruism, of egoism, but we need something new called rational self-interest. But that's hard. We need something new. Why? You know, what's wrong with altruism? You know, so it's you know, his altruism is not about sacrifice. It's just about being nice to people. It's about taking everybody's consideration into account. And they always do that, right? So I think those are highlights. I think you'll enjoy the debate. I think it went well. I read his book and I prepared a whole talk. My opening statement was gonna be this. I had all the points. I had everything prepared. I had quotes from the book. I had this whole thing. And then after his presentation, I basically put that aside and just got up and did my spiel, you know, did my thing. And it worked out much better. And, but it was good because the prep, this is just a point about how to prepare for a talk or debate. The prep, the outline, the points, the quotes, all condition your subconscious to when you put them aside, you can now, it just comes out because the subconscious is already conditioned with the material, even though you're doing something completely different and the order is completely different and the points you're making are reshuffled. The content is basically the same content. So the prep is crucial to even when you're doing it extemporaneously. Yeah, but I'm looking forward to getting that. It'll be on Reason TV and then I'll upload it to my channel and it'll be available on my channel.
Okay, I was wondering that too. Just so real quick, when he says, yeah, so profits, of course, they're necessary for survival. Is he talking about for the survival of the company?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and he uses the analogy, and he does this in the book too. I think it's a silly analogy. He says, you know, we have red blood cells. The body has red blood cells. It couldn't survive without red blood cells, but the purpose of life is not red blood cells, right? All right, yeah. So he's viewing profit as, yeah, we need capital. Business needs capital, but it can be. And he never talks about property rights. He never talks about the owners. And when I pointed that out to him, he says, yeah, well, of course, the owners. Of course, I care about shareholders. Of course, I want to make shareholders money. Of course, I care about profits. But I think that I can care about profits while also caring about all the other stakeholders equally. And I'm going, no, you can't. And it's a tough one.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. All right, Daniel.
In some of the previous questions, I think you talked about something Leonard said to you that in some ways we're not ready for Ayn Rand and her philosophy. And maybe you extended the point and said psychologically there's a lot against someone in the culture being ready for it. And yet you, me, something like 100,000 people worldwide, you know, somehow got through that, right? I mean, we grabbed a hold of our life. We said, this is important. I want to make it good. And we took a firsthand look at what Ayn Rand was saying. And eventually we came around and we said, okay, this is the way to live. I mean, what is that thing that makes people take a firsthand look at the world, and how do we encourage more kids to develop that kind of an approach to their lives?
So that is a question that's been baffling me for what, 40 years, you know, since I started arguing with everybody and trying to convince them. Why was I different? Because I didn't seem different. I'm not smarter than they are. You know, the people out there with much higher IQ than I have, that I'm not, you know, there was no particular dimension I could figure out that I was different from them, or the people I knew who did take it seriously were different from the people who didn't take it seriously. I just don't see it. So I don't know is at the end of the day, it's an important question. It's a question that needs to be answered, because I think you're right. We need to either become better at identifying people who already have it, or teaching people how to adopt it. But so I'll take a shot at speculating, right, about this, but this is not particularly scientific. There's something about independence. There's something about independent thought, the willingness to be an independent thinker, to stand your ground versus the rest of the culture. But more importantly than even what others think, it's to face reality and accept its verdict. So combine it with honesty. So combine independence with honesty. You know, that it's not your capacity to be rational or even, but your commitment to it, which I think independence and honesty really capture. It's the commitment to reason. Because again, there are people who are in their particular fields might have more capacity. Again, it's not rationality, but they have a higher capacity. Or it's, yes, that integration between honesty and independence, taking reason seriously, in other words, taking reality seriously, taking the fact seriously. And if they are being willing to commit yourself to reality and to reason and to why does somebody develop independently and honesty? At the end of the day, there's probably no answer to that. It's probably some choices they made in childhood. You know, goes back to free will, but you're not, free will is not an open invitation to change anything about yourself at any time. There's, you know, because certain things you decide when you're very young. It's some commitment you make when you're very young to reality and to yourself and to your independence, some level of self-esteem that you probably have in a subtle way, because I don't think you can look at all the objectives out there and say they're all particularly confident or they're all particularly when they're teenagers or when they read Ayn Rand, but there's something deep down that it commits them to this, to their own mind and to reality. I don't know how you identify people like that. And my only thought is that in order to develop more people like that, you have to get them young. You have to orient education around independent thinking, around allowing people to explore, experiment, fail, learn. I think the culture is moving in the opposite direction. The helicopter parents coddling our kids, removing them from reality that sometimes can be painful, coddling them emotionally. We do that way too much. You've got to, somebody says define, get them young as you can, right? And that means preschool education. And of course, parents, but I'd say preschool education and create environments that are both safe and allow exploration, both cognitive and physical. I think there's a real role for physical independence, not just cognitive independence. But yeah, it's something like that, because otherwise it's hard for me to, what is the common, when I look at different people that I know who are objectivists, where they grew up, when they grew up, under what conditions they grew up, that's the only thing that seems to be the common denominator. But it's also ex post. There's a bias, obviously, to doing. It's very difficult to figure that out. And then, so I don't know what we can do to encourage that other than to get them when they're very young.
And certainly, you know, I hope that education makes a difference. And I sent my daughter to the same school your sons went to early on, and she turned out great, but it's a sample of one, right? You know, it was a good learning environment. You know, I don't know. I don't have the answer either, but certainly I think under private education, it has to be better than our government-run schools.
Well, and this is the point I was making before, you know, during that spiel that when I mentioned what Leonard Peikoff had said, and Leonard had not said it to me, he said it publicly. So it's in one of the Q&As, it's somewhere where he talked about the culture not being ready and hadn't evolved to the point of being ready, or I can't remember the exact words he used, but it wasn't ready and it would take decades before it was ready. And it wasn't that it just wasn't exposed to the ideas, but it wasn't ready for the ideas in some deep sense. And I think he's right. I think it's education, but it's also sense of life. It's also it's the attitude of the culture. And this is why it happens in subtle ways. It happens over time. It happens probably slowly with incremental changes. While a lot of ugly things happen. So, you know, if you're sitting in the Renaissance and let's say you're sitting in the Renaissance and you run the Renaissance Institute and you're trying to bring about an enlightenment, you're trying to bring about the creation of America, right? and it's 1550. And, you know, you're trying to get to 1776 and create the path you take, if you look at the Renaissance to the creation of America, that path is not a straight line. And it's incredibly bloody in between. Some of the bloodiest wars per capita in all of human history, occurred during that period, like the 30-Year War, which is just massacre after massacre after massacre. It's unthinkable. It's bloodier than World War II, right? In terms of casualties, World War I, in terms of casualties, both civilian and, I mean, Protestants slaughtered Catholics and Catholics slaughtered on scales unimaginable to modern mind, right? But in the background, scholars were studying, scientists were doing work, ideas are starting to filter through an underground of, really an underground of book publishing. Libraries were being created. If you study the period, it's astounding how horrific it is to live, how the politics of it are unbelievably ugly, and how much is happening in the background that makes possible 1776, without which 1766 doesn't exist. Like thinkers in Amsterdam, Spinoza in the 1650s, Descartes, who's a bad philosopher, but is part of a movement that is moving things forward towards an enlightenment and towards. So people get discouraged by politics or even by certain parts of the culture, and makes complete sense, but don't lose sight of the big picture. And that is what really matters is this undercurrent. What really matters is that objectivism grow, is that there are more of us, there are more intellectuals, there are more writings, there are more applications to different fields, that there's this underground effect of spreading these ideas. And yet, yes, a lot of people are going to suffer through some horrific times in the next 50 to 100 years, but we will win, just like ultimately out of that mayhem, out of that bloodbath arose an enlightenment, and partially as a response to it arose an enlightenment, and ultimately the creation of America.
Even the idea of private property came along during that time, right? I mean, it was only, before that, you only owned land because of who your father was. I mean, yeah.
Yes, I mean, that period is the most intellectually fruitful, maybe with the exception of Greece, in human history, because all the modern concepts that we have today that have allowed for freedom and liberty were really invented or really better understood, promoted, expanded during that period. And it's also a period of amazing aesthetic achievement, right? And I don't think that's an accident. And it's a period of amazing scientific achievement, right? It's the beginning, it's a scientific revolution. That whole period is from, starting from before Galileo all the way through Newton into the 19th century. I mean, and it's incremental. It's getting where we need it to get, but it takes a long time. It's hard, and it's in an environment that is unbelievably inhospitable. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ori.
Hey, Aaron.
Hey.
I have an easy question, or maybe it's not easy, but it's a fun question. What's your favorite city from every continent?
Wow. What's my favorite city from every continent? So Europe is the toughest one because there's a lot of competition. There are a lot of great cities in Europe. Now, challenge with Europe is primarily focused on the past. So Europe, you go for history, right? And historical culture, not so much the present. But at the, so it's hard because, there's Florence, there's Paris, there is, I really like Denmark because Copenhagen, it's a modern city. It's an exciting city. It's a fun city. But my favorite has to be, at the end of the day, London. London just combines it all, and they speak English, right? So which is a cherry on the top, right? It's got the culture and the history and the elegance of the 19th century. And you walk, every neighborhood is a little different, and it's got that history everywhere. It's got great museums. It's got really, which is weird, but it's got really good food, which is very strange and very weird. But it's also got it's got a sense of present and future, because it does have the city there. So it's a financial capital. Cranes building condo and office buildings constantly on the horizon, constant development, constant building. I also love London for reasons that most people don't like it, so I'm going to get in trouble for this. But I love its, call it, I hate this word. Well, let me see if I can get another word. It's a city of immigrants. It's a city filled with immigrants of all kinds. Now, too many Muslims. I acknowledge that, particularly too many Muslims wearing, the full deal. But many of those, or some of those Muslims are slowly becoming westernized. So some of them that I meet, and I meet a lot in the business, because I do a lot of business in London, a lot in the business world who completely westernized. So it doesn't matter, over time, I think that's the effect Western civilization has on people, even Muslims, to some people's shock. But it's this, and by the way, that's why the food is so good, because the British can't cook. I mean, they can cook because they've learned from the French and others, but British food sucks, but really, because I was there in the 60s. I was a kid in England, and there's certain British dishes that still cause me nightmares. And when I see other people eating, I get a little nausea. I mean, literally true, because when I was a kid, I had to eat that food and it was so disgusting. But yeah, it's just this combination. Again, I like the Brits. I like the accent. I love Oxford, which is not London, but close enough. Antifa attacked me in London, so I'll always love London for that, because I got a lot of followers on YouTube because of that. So please, Antifa, if you can attack me somewhere else, it's good PR. So yeah, so London's my favorite probably in Europe, although I do like these other cities. I mean, Paris is, from an art perspective, is the pinnacle. I do like Copenhagen, and again, to be in Venice, and not Venice, Florence, and to be embedded in the Renaissance environment is truly special. All right, that's one, right? Europe. I have nothing on Antarctica, nothing. So 0 on Antarctica. Latin America is easy. It's just easy, right? Latin America is actually home to the most beautiful city in the world. Not a city you'd want to live in. And if you go visit it, you have to be very, very careful. But it's just, if I see pictures of it on TV, I get excited, right? And that is Rio de Janeiro. Rio de Janeiro is a special place. It's just magnificent in its beauty. It is, the people are incredibly friendly. There's a dynamism. There's a fun. There's also a lot of violence. But so you have to be careful. But Rio, I could, every year I could go to Rio. I've got my hotel, and it's not even because the hotel's great, but because the view out the window, and I know what room I like, so they give me the room that I always ask for, the same room. It's got the view and everything. So yeah, Rio de Janeiro is really special. And hopefully, if everything works out, I will be giving a talk in Rio de Janeiro in April. So I'm hoping that works out well. Okay, Africa. I haven't been to much of Africa, so I can't really comment on my, because I haven't been to that many cities. But I suspect this is probably everybody's favorite city in Africa. There's probably one city that's more beautiful than all other cities, and that is Cape Town. Cape Town is truly magnificent. It's the natural setting is beautiful. It's a troubled city because of the apartheid past, but there's a natural beauty there, and it's close to wilderness on the one hand, and it's close to the wine country, South African wine country. I just had a glass of South African red wine last night. The wine is exceptional, but it is troubled. It's, again, a very violent city, unfortunately, very violent city. All right, where are we? Are we in so Europe's
Asia and North America.
North America. Oh my God, how do you do North America? North America is the toughest, probably. I don't know. I guess it would have to be New York. Again, not a city I want to live in, but it's America. It's what America represents. It's excitement in the streets. At least it was. We'll see coming out of COVID what it's like, and coming out of de Blasio what it's like. But it is. I mean, I love. You know, in a different world, maybe San Francisco, if you could zap the homeless people out of there. But the homeless people in San Francisco are really obnoxious. I mean, it really does dramatically cause your experience of the city to deteriorate significantly. And I lived close by, and this is 30 years ago. It was horrible. 25, you know, when did I live there? In the mid 90s, it was awful. And today it's much worse. So,
yeah, I just moved to San Francisco like 2 weeks ago. And
you did? Okay,
yep.
Well, you know, be careful where you step, right? I mean, certain neighborhoods, certainly. So but it is the most beautiful city in America, and the most dynamic today because of Silicon Valley, because Silicon Valley to some extent has migrated north towards San Francisco, and it's a very young city, and it's full of that New York type of energy, certain parts of it, but it's so corrupt because of city management and because of the homelessness. So I'd still stick with New York, but those are the two cities that above everything else. I love Chicago. You know, I love Austin, Texas, but America is those two cities, and everything America represents, good and bad, are in those two cities. What am I left with?
Asia, and you can skip Australia, just Asia.
Yeah, I'm trying to think Australia. Can I make my favorite city in Australia and New Zealand?
Sure.
New Zealand's a country and it's not in Australia, but I'm a huge New Zealand fan. I love New Zealand. Christchurch in the mountains. It's got a horrible name, but it's the most beautiful place I think on planet Earth. Asia is easy, or at least was easy. There's no question that my favorite place in Asia is Hong Kong. And everything that Hong Kong represents, and everything that Hong Kong is, its natural beauty, its skyscrapers, its amazing people, it's the energy of the place, the productiveness, the excitement, the freedom. And one of the saddest things in the world over the last couple of years is the erosion of freedom in Hong Kong, and the dominance, the slow dominance of China, authoritarian China over Hong Kong. One of the great foreign policy tragedies in America has been that we've heard nothing from either Trump or Biden about Hong Kong as president. So they basically given up on Hong Kong. They gave up from day one. So it's truly sad. But you know, I've taken the train from China into Hong Kong. I've flown into Hong Kong. I've taken I've driven on the road from there's a road that takes you from Hong Kong to Macau, which is pretty spectacular. And Hong Kong is just amazing. I mean, as beautiful as Singapore is, it's just not Hong Kong. And you don't have that sense of freedom, at least didn't have in the past, sense of freedom that you do in Hong Kong. I've only been in Singapore once, and it's beautiful and it's an amazing place. But Hong Kong just has to win out on that one. I'm not a fan of Tokyo. I love Shanghai, but Shanghai, the downside of Shanghai is it's in China, but I do love Shanghai. And of course, there's always Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, which is not the prettiest place in the world, but it's pretty cool. It's Ulaanbaatar, and the people there are wonderful. And there's a real Ayn Rand following in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. And it's a fun place to be. Seoul is an interesting place. I like Seoul. It's just, and I've had good experiences in Seoul, South Korea. It just doesn't have, it's spread out. It's all over the place. It doesn't have that intensity, concentration, focus that Hong Kong has, and to some extent Singapore has. So it just doesn't match those partially because just the geography of it, it's so spread out. It's all over the place. It's like Houston to some extent. There's no clear downtown. There's a number of different centers. It's hard to get a sense of the city. At least I have. I've been there twice. I've had a hard time getting a sense of the city. And I'm a big fan of South Korea, primarily their television dramas. All right, Deborah.
Thank you.
Or is it Deborah?
Hi,
Tell me-
Yaron.
Hi.
Yeah, you were right the first time. It's Deborah.
Good.
So my question is about altruism and how it got so entrenched. I mean, I know that now it is, and so that makes it really hard to get people to really let go of it in favor of something that's more life affirming. But how did it get so entrenched in the first place? It seems like people would have been really resistant to accepting a system of morality that says you can't live and be happy. And that even now, when people hear about objectivism and the objectivist ethics, they'd say, oh, there's a system of morality that says I don't have to feel guilty about trying to be happy and take care of myself, but I'm allowed to live and be happy and that it's actually good for me to do that. Okay, well, I'm going to drop altruism like a bad habit and go for egoism instead. Like even now, I'm baffled by the fact that it's so hard to sell that to people. But the fact that it got so entrenched in the first place, it's like as if there were a species of animal or something that just they were hell bent on running off a cliff all the time, and that species would not last very long. So what do you think the answer is?
I think it makes more sense that it got so entrenched than that it's so difficult today, right? So I can see how it got entrenched. I just don't see why people don't give it up because it's so obviously a failure. And there's an alternative now where there wasn't in the past. So I think it came out of kind of tribal society where it was presented to people as there's no real choice because we have to stick together and the tribe has to survive and your children depend on the tribe and you need a sacrifice for the tribe. And it's kind of an aspect of the tribalism, collectivism in which we kind of evolved. And as part of that, because we are an animal that requires explanations, why is this happening? Why is that happening? We needed witch doctors, right? Witch doctors was one of the earliest professions I think human beings had because we needed explanations and they came up with these explanations. And then they had a very strong incentive to also start guiding our lives and telling us, well, I know how we should live because it's hard because we're not, I don't quite understand how human beings evolved. So human evolution is an interesting scientific question because, there are lots of different humanoids and Homo sapiens is just one branch that actually landed up dominating. To what extent did the others have free will? Did they have a little bit of free will, mostly free will, none free? The whole question of when did free will come in and all of that. So imagine going from animal to human suddenly and being completely dependent on your own thinking. Now, it didn't happen to one individual, right? It happened over time. And we don't know exactly how it happened, but it happened somehow. And you're confronted with all this and you don't know. So the witch doctor then hooks up, as Ayn Rand describes it, with the Attila, the tribal chief, and they basically rule over man and most people just go along because they can't imagine an alternative. And nobody really imagines an alternative. Nobody really imagines you can discover kind of truth or anything outside of the witch doctor until Greece. So then you get this Greek period where suddenly there's this awakening and individualism and heroism. And it's just stunning, right? That they achieved what they achieved when they achieved it. And in a sense, out of nowhere, in a deep sense. And then for whatever historical reason, and I don't know the history well enough, Aristotelian ethics in particular are not really picked up. And so when Rome rises, there's a search for how to live and what to guide yourself, but there's no clear answers. There's no principles and there's nothing really. And it's a very bifurcated society. There's the aristocratic, wealthy, there's the poor, there's slavery. and there's no universal ethic. So yes, the Roman aristocrats have an ethical code that they live by that is not horrible, right? Probably early on, becomes more horrible over time, but it's probably not, pretty good. Maybe even based on some Aristotelian principles, some idea of pride and honor and things like that. But nobody else in society can, and nobody else can afford to. And this is my point about why I understand it back then. What did Hobbes say about human life?
Nasty,
short,
brutish, short, solitary,
nasty, brutish, short.
something. Yeah.
Nasty, brutish, and short. And Ayn Rand criticized him for saying that. And that's right. As a philosopher, that's a horrible thing to say. But that's, as a scientist looking out at human beings, that's a very accurate thing to say. When he said it in the 17th century, life was nasty, brutish, and short. And certainly for poor people in the Roman Empire, life was for the most part nasty, brutish, and short. And then comes this religion. Again, we're looking for answers, and we're looking for universal answers. And the answer that they give is, there is this God, and there's this amazing superhero who died for you so that you could be redeemed and that you could go to heaven. And you see him on a cross, and he's this magnificent thing that died for you. And isn't that amazing, so that you can live? And yes, this life sucks. It's nasty, brutish, and short. But there's a heaven, and you will get rewarded for your sacrifices and for living for this. And hey, if we poor people all stick together, maybe one day we can overthrow the Romans and maybe help all poor people. And they do, right? They basically, Rome becomes so decadent and so corrupt and so anti-intellectual, that ultimately, Constantine converts to Christianity. It's the dominant philosophy of the time, I guess. And he doesn't believe it. He's not going to sacrifice, but he wants to hedge his bets just in case there's an afterlife. And he picks up the sword and he slaughters people. So that doesn't stop him. But for poor people, this is the way to salvation. And then you have 1,000 years of, well, more than 1,000 years, maybe 1,200 years of nasty, brutish, and short. What else do they have to live for? They have to live for death. Really, Christianity has taught them that the purpose of life is to die. And when you die, you get rewarded if you live according to these principles. And those principles are guided by. And then the Enlightenment tries to challenge that, begins to challenge that, right? There's the pursuit of happiness. There's this idea of individualism. There's the idea of happiness. There's the idea of success. There's the idea of universality, the universality of reason, the universality of maybe there's a moral code that's better, but they can't quite give up on God yet, and they can't give up on Christianity yet. It's still got a grip on them. So they're struggling, but they come close. God, they come close, right? Well, damn, they come close. And then, I'm not a philosopher, but based on my understanding, then comes Immanuel Kant, and he basically takes altruism and secularizes it and embeds it in the culture, in the philosophical culture, rips apart all the Enlightenment's achievements philosophically, says all of this is wrong. Look at all the mistakes you've made. Look, none of this makes any sense. Reasserts this altruism as the only moral possibility there is. And until Ayn Rand, people now don't have anywhere to go. They're confronted with religion, has some morality, has some guidance. Secularism, there's nothing. The Hegelian, whatever, Marx, nothing. And certainly no alternative morality to Christianity. They all have the same Christian morality. There's nothing. So it's only Ayn Rand, and there's no real, the Enlightenment is dead as an ideology being taught from a moral perspective. So people have absorbed the egoism into their lives. So they live somewhat self-interested lives, but they're raked with guilt because of the altruism. And to this day, that's where we are. And it's only Ayn Rand who suddenly comes around and says, yes, let's complete the Enlightenment project. I mean, that was not her goal, but that's what she literally does. She completes the Enlightenment project and she establishes egoism on proper foundations and explains it and articulates it. And And you could make the argument, maybe it's too late because the enlightenment spirit has been already sucked out. You could make the argument that no, it's still so entrenched and we haven't made the argument well enough. And you can make, I don't know what the answer is about why we can't get through today, but I understand it 2000 years ago much more than I understand it now.
Well, I was thinking that the reasons for today, it makes more sense to me now, given that it's already entrenched. There's all kinds of social pressure, and there's the fear of going against the grain, and the insecurity that's entrenched in people's minds because they were raised with altruism, which says you're no good and other people are what really matter. You know, so like to me, actually, it makes more sense now than it does then. Unfortunately, I still don't get it. It seems like people.
Yeah, and beyond that, think of the art, right? So all the superheroes are there to sacrifice their own happiness for the sake of mankind, right? For the sake of others. I mean, there are no egoistic superheroes, and they're never presented as egoistic. They're all playing by some kind of altruistic rules. Our literature is filled with altruistic. So all the models of behavior, altruistic models of behavior. And the only people who model egoism in life are businessmen. And that's rejected, right? That's partly why they're hated. What is that animal behind you?
It's a turtle. A painted turtle. Yeah.
Is that a rat? What exactly is going on? Because it's moving.
Yeah,
But
it's alive. It's a painted turtle. That's a species. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, a painted turtle is a species. Okay.
It's not a painting of a turtle. It's a painted turtle.
Exactly. I'm getting worried. Okay, so now I know it's a turtle.
No,
I don't like rats, so it's
no, it's not a rat.
Good. So yes, I think it's drilled into their subconscious. I mean, I know from my upbringing, right? When I was a kid, all the stories, all the songs, all the mythology was around sacrifice, was around sacrificing for the state or sacrificing for the Jewish people or sacrificing for fill in the blank, but it was all sacrifice. And to break away from that is very, very, very difficult. And some of us can do it, and most of us, it looks like, can't. And it's going to take a while. And part of why I always emphasize art is we have to start changing the stories. We have to start telling different stories. And we have to start pointing out the difference in the stories and what makes the stories different. We have to create new heroes. And for that, we need great artists who can do that, which is not easy. Because you can even interpret David, right? That's David with a leg on Goliath's head. And there's a certain sense in which that's pretty arrogant and self-confident and, you know, wow, I mean, that's a young kid and he's just destroyed a giant. That's self-esteem. That's everything we hold. But the way most people see it, first of all, they don't like it, partially because of that, right? This is not art today that is shown young people, that is explained to young people, that is discussed with young people. This is of an era. This was done in the 19th century. This is of an era that it was still more enlightenment, where the heroes were important. But also, when you talk about David, you know, was willing to sacrifice his life for the sake of the cause. You know, that's the story, rather than the story of heroism and pursuit of values. And it's easy to spin it that way. So,
you're on. Is another way to come at Deborah's question to say, hey, life is not easy. It takes a lot of mental effort to thrive as a human, both materially and spiritually. And, you know, collectivism it's an easier path. Yep. It doesn't require as much mental effort. And the fact that it's already entrenched.
Well, that's why it doesn't require so much mental effort. Yeah. Because it's already entrenched. You just follow everybody else. You do like everybody else. You're not standing up. It's hard enough. You're right, Darius. It's hard enough just to get your work done and do a good job and earn a living and have a family and have kids and do all the things you need to do in order to thrive. And then you want me to stand up to the culture? You want me to take a completely different course? Yeah, that's rough. that is difficult for them. You're right.
Mhm.
All right, good questions. Jonathan, last but not least.
Hi, Ron.
All right.
I just wanted to applaud you. I don't actually have a question. I just wanted to applaud you specifically for your show about philosophy. And I'm kind of just now catching up with a lot of your programming because it's just so good and I savor it. But your show on objectivism being the philosophy of love, I think was, you prefaced it by saying something effective. You know, it wasn't going to be as widely listened to or watched, as if you had made it about the alt-right or something. But those are the topics that I find of such great value and help make your exploration of objectivism for me so meaningful. So thank you for that and keep it up.
Yeah, that was the Valentine's Day show. So that was, I think it's called Valentine's Day and the Philosophy of Love or something like that. But yes, I've been for years now using that term of objectivism as the philosophy of love. And maybe that's how we can get more people interested in it. Hard to tell what the angle is going to have to be. But thank you, Jonathan. I really appreciate that. All right, let's take some super chat questions. I'll do the ones that I think are $20 or more. There are 3 of them. What do you make of John Mackey's assertion that we're never going to convince the majority of the population that selfishness is a good thing? That's a criticism I often hear against objectivism, even from libertarians. Yeah, I mean, never is a long time. And if I thought that was true, then I'd be buying tickets on Elon Musk's shuttle to Mars. But I don't think that's true. I just don't think that there's any reason to believe that. Now, if the argument is in my lifetime, will we convince a majority of the population? The answer is no. We won't. But will we someday? Yes, I have confidence in human beings that I've described often the kind of cultural changes that have to happen for that to happen. But yes, I think that can happen. Second, if he's right, then it's doomed. Then there's no point in advocating for capitalism. Because like it or not, capitalism is the system of selfishness. Like it or not, selfishness is the right moral code. Like it or not, if you advocate for altruism and capitalism, you'll get socialism. So he is just feeding the culture. He's just feeding our enemies. The libertarians generally as a movement feed our enemies, support our enemies, make our enemies stronger by granting them the moral high ground. And therefore they will never win. And if they win, the worst elements among the libertarians will take over and destroy whatever victory they have. Make it whether it's, probably the anarchists. So there is no victory. There is no meaning to the term victory unless it's a victory of selfishness, unless it's a victory of morality. That is the alternative is not victory. It's not capitalism. It's not freedom. It's impossible. And that's not pessimistic at all. That's reality, people. Capitalism will not survive without a moral revolution. That is a fact. And indeed, we've had it, right? We've had capitalism, and it gave way to altruism and to statism. So it's just not happening. But the moral revolution is very possible. Not that, over time, not that difficult.
Yaron, it just seems that the common culture thinks of selfishness as the same way we refer to self-centeredness, like, people thinking they're the center of the world and something, which we would say is a negative thing, is destructive. So a lot of it just seems to be a messaging problem. And, why not just first lean into?
I don't think it is. So when you peel down, okay, so you say, okay, I agree with you. Let's stop using the word selfishness. It's not that. It's not self-centered. It's about pursuing your own happiness by focusing your attention, by focusing your mind on your values and your life. Do you agree with me now? No. Or when they say, yeah, kind of, but you have to take care of the poor, and you have to take care of these people, and you have to take care of those people, and you have to sacrifice for those people. they can't give up on what's at the heart of it. So I don't think it's a semantic issue. I think it really is, they don't know what it means to live for yourself, and they don't want to give up on the altruism. But I do think we can win, and I do think we will win. It just takes time.
Yeah, I mean, even though when you point out, like, name one thing you did between 9 and 5 today that wasn't in your self-interest.
Well, but you see, I think that's wrong, because I think I could name probably 100 things they did between 9 to 5 that wasn't in their self-interest.
Like what?
Like they acted without thinking. They
went to church.
They might have eaten food they knew was bad for them. They might have gone to church, but they might have dealt with a client in a way that's not completely rational. So self-interest means not emotionally doing what you think is what you feel like, which is what they do. Rational self-interest means thinking and really focusing and really making an effort and really investing in, what am I doing? Why am I doing it?
But what I'm getting at is the vast majority of people do go through their day kind of going to work. Why are they going to work? To pursue their values.
Sure, but they're not. Self-interest is much more than that, is my point. I mean, how many of them are going to work out of a sense of duty? How many of them are going to work because that's what you have to do? What can you do otherwise? How do you survive? How many of them going to work because they're choosing, having thought of it, to pursue a career, which is what morality requires you to do, right? Which is what egoism, selfishness requires you to do. This is why I always say selfishness is work. Selfishness means I need to figure out that this is the right career for me. I need to figure out that going to work is actually in my self-interest rather than going to school or rather than going to the beach or rather than staying home. So yes, they're not being altruistic. That's true. From 9 to 5, they're not altruistic, but they're not egoistic either. They're in this
Blur.
Exactly. Blur is a good word, right? And they don't mind the blur, right? It would drive me crazy. And they feel guilty for the blur because they think they should have done something more meaningful, right? It's why ESG is so attractive to them, right? Because they think that by ESG investing, they can redeem themselves from all the blur that they've done, right? They can act on, virtuously through their investing. It's why these things have appeal, because they're in a blur. All right, a couple more questions. Do you believe we should go back to a gold standard to limit potential monetary abuses of the government, or is additional debt available through fiat money more valuable because it stimulates growth in the short run? I'm not an advocate of going to a gold standard or of fiat money. I'm an advocate of free banking. I'm an advocate of freedom. I don't think a gold standard managed by government would do well at all. Ultimately, that's what we had in the 1920s, and we got a Great Depression as a consequence. So I'm not a fan of a government-based gold standard. I'm a fan of government getting out of the business of monetary policy completely. So far more radical. I'm for getting rid of the Federal Reserve and then letting the market determine. I mean, the government can say, we'll take gold as taxes, and here's how we value gold. And maybe the government fixes a value to gold, right? Well, it wouldn't even do that, right? It wouldn't even do that. It would fix an initial value to gold. This is how we denominate gold, in terms of, so you know what gold, what the government is willing to take as taxes, right? But that's it. And then beyond that, the market will develop, and maybe the Bitcoiners are right, and maybe we land up using Bitcoin. Maybe somebody else is right, and we end up using platinum, or maybe we land up using, I don't know, some material or something or some innovation none of us have discovered, right? I don't know. That's the beauty of markets. I suspect it will be cryptocurrency based on gold, but what do I know, right? The beauty is that the market will decide those things, and That's it. And if the government wants you to pay taxes in gold denominated something, then you pay them in gold denominated something. But you, in day-to-day transactions, use whatever currency you think is appropriate and the market determines is appropriate. So I don't want the government involved. And I think that's a more radical and more true view than let's go on a gold standard. I think that's a big mistake to go on a gold standard and give government the power over that gold standard. All right. I said, if I told you, take care of yourself, that's nice, right? She smiled and agreed. I said, but I just told you to be selfish. See, selfishness is nice. She got mad and refused to listen any further. Any advice? What date was this? Was this the first date? That's probably the problem. Any advice? I don't think that what you're trying to do is say that selfishness is nice. I don't think that should be the goal. I think the goal should be selfishness is the way to happiness and the way to flourishing, to living a great life. Nice is too mild. It's too, in a sense, you're buying into kind of the altruistic view of altruism is just to be nice to people. And it's not take care of yourself that's nice, because taking care of yourself has a very deep meaning. And you're trying to create a syllogism that just doesn't really work, because once you break it down, it doesn't really add up. So you've got to show her where values come from. You've got to show her why why people seek values, and imagine if they focus their minds on constantly pursuing values, what kind of life that would lead to. And so it's not an issue of niceness. It's an issue of survival and living as a human being fully as a human being. All right, this was a very early on question, so I'll take it and then I'll return to our panel here. What is the relationship between objectivism, psychology, and especially psychiatry? How the three are related and how they apply? Now, that's a big question, and I'm certainly not an expert on this. I would say, though, that they're related, but also separate. Psychology and psychiatry are sciences. I mean, you might say not very scientific sciences, or they are. I don't know. I'm not an expert on any of those sciences. Objectivism is a philosophy. It underpins it all. It provides you the context. So, for example, objectivism says man has free will. Well, that's important for psychology, and it's important for psychiatry. It doesn't then tell you how to do your psychology and how to do psychiatry. But whether you believe in free will or don't believe in free will, to a large extent, shape the kind of psychology and the kind of psychiatry you ultimately do. So it's principles like that. If you study the psychoepistemology of objectivism, if you study the objectivist epistemology generally, how the human mind works, how concepts works, how people, the relationship between emotions and reason, those are philosophical issues that are crucial. And then once you have those philosophical issues down, core philosophy, now a whole world opens up to you in terms of psychology. What is the relationship between emotions and reason according to objectivism? Emotions and conclusions mean for psychology and psychiatry. Now that's interesting. That's a science thing. And if I wish the science would focus on that. So then you have to go into the specifics, the details about the science itself, and what the science has to say, and what kind of science you build around these philosophical principles. Okay. So philosophy underpins all science, because philosophy sets the conditions, the terms, and psychology and psychiatry deal with the nature of man. So the part of the psychology that is important, the part of the philosophy that is important for them is that part of the philosophy that deals with the nature of man. All right, I hope that was helpful. All right, Jennifer.
When we were talking about accepting altruism, I was thinking about guilt. Nature is really difficult, like you said, that's true. And doesn't Christianity teach that it's not just that it's difficult, but that it's humans' fault that it's difficult because original sin and all that? So if people think, oh, maybe this is my fault that it's like this, so therefore I have to.
There's definitely that. I mean, I've talked a lot in the past about the Garden of Eden myth, which is very powerful in that, right? Human beings betrayed God and therefore gave up a life of idleness and a life where everything was provided to them with no effort, no struggle, no difficulty, nothing. Everything was just there. It was just given. So that's part of original sin is the, what's perceived as this betrayal of God, right? In the Garden of Eden. But yes, original sin tells them that they are sinful. It's, again, part of, imagine you're a poor person under the Roman Empire, trying to figure out life. Greek ideas are gone. There's no real Greek philosophy in the culture. You're trying to figure out the world, but you're struggling. Life sucks. And since you weren't born to the right family, there's no way out of this, right? There's just no way out. And somebody comes and says, well, the reason life sucks is because as human beings, we've done these things and this is original sin or whatever, right? And God has this relationship, but God really loves you. Don't worry. And the crucial bit of it is the afterlife, which Judaism didn't have and what made Christianity so much more powerful, right? So much more powerful. Judaism only adopts the afterlife. Maimonides adopts the afterlife because I think Maimonides recognizes that Judaism is going to fail. It's going to be Christianized completely unless Judaism adopts the afterlife from the Christians. And that's Maimonides is what, 14th century, something like that. So pretty late. But Christianity succeeds because it universalizes. Jews are the worst kind of racists possible, right? Our religion, you can't join. If you join, we have to do all these horrible things to you and you have to study and we don't really want you to join, right? We're the chosen people. We're different. We're better than everybody else. I mean, they really think this. I have, I know, Jews who say, that are just the worst racists. Now, Jews are not, as a people, particularly racist at all. But the ideology behind it sets you up. So it's very exclusionary, very tribal. And now a religion comes about that's universalist. Everybody can get salvation. Everybody can be good. Everybody's chosen by God. And yes, you might suffer in this world, but that suffering is just a prelude to infinite, pleasure or whatever heaven is like. So it's that contrast between Judaism's exclusivity and Christianity's universality is what made Christianity take off. And then the afterlife, which is a very powerful tool. And a devil. A devil is always good to have a devil. Christians took that from the Zoroastrians. There's a little bit of a devil in Judaism in the book of Job, but it really plays no role really other than that. But in Christianity plays a big role because you're tempted. It's the issue of temptation. You're constantly being tempted by bad stuff that you have to overcome. And it's again related to guilt and to original sin and to all that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
All right, Daniel.
The yield curve continues to steepen. Long bonds are up above 2%. If inflation is coming back, what can people do to protect their investments? What are the downsides of tips? What other things can they do?
Well, I mean, the three main sources of inflation protection: gold. I think people are familiar with gold. Generally, it protects inflation. I think in this case, some of that inflation at least is already priced in gold. So I think if you're buying at these levels, it's because you anticipate even greater inflation in the future. And maybe that's the case, but there's a risk there. Tips. TIPS are inflation adjusted bonds. So you're making inflation plus a very low interest rate as your compensation. The risk there, of course, is that inflation never picks up and you're stuck with a very low interest rate, but at least you get some kind of real interest rate. And also the fact that inflation, the way inflation is measured, whether that's a good measure or it actually reflects a purchasing power, I don't know. But that's not, I'm not sure even gold that's true. So it's hard to know what purchasing power even means as an aggregate. The third is the stock market, surprisingly. Stocks don't go down a lot under inflation. I mean, they don't particularly do well, but they don't particularly do badly. They just kind of hover there, and you probably make back your purchasing power, not much more. And the reason is that corporations, businesses, raise their prices under inflation and therefore remain profitable. It destroys long-term planning, but they adapt fairly quickly. These big companies, they're well diversified and they can adapt. There are also many, if you go into these companies, look for global companies, look at the bigger players in the S&P 500, because they're probably have more ways to protect themselves against inflation. I think those are the main ways you can do it. From an investment perspective, stay away from bonds, obviously. Bonds, you'll get crushed with inflation, but that's where everybody rushes to for safety, but not from inflation. Not for inflation. You might not default, although even there, there's John Cochrane makes a good argument that the U.S. government is more likely to default than create hyperinflation long term. There's more political cost over a longer period of time to inflation than there is to default. So, because the default happens primarily among the wealthy and among big corporations and banks, and you can buffer the pain for the average citizen in some way. So he has a whole theory about why default is probably the way we're going to go. But in the short run, we're going to have inflation, I think, at least some inflation anyway. We will see. It's hard to make these predictions, but the bond market seems to, for the first time in a long time, seems to be indicating that might be the direction we're heading. All right, Matt.
Yeah, I would also add to Dan, your question, as an alternative investment in an inflationary environment would be income producing real estate. That's the industry I'm in. And as inflation rises and the prices of commodities and land, everything rises, then the replacement cost to generate additional supply in the marketplace rises because higher wages to construction workers, lumber costs more. So if you can buy, which I know you can right now, you can buy properties below replacement cost, then you're protected from future competition, and you have a competitive advantage against additional supply coming in the future. So besides actually purchasing those assets yourself, you could buy into a publicly traded REIT or a private placement limited partnership, or lots of ways to invest in income producing real estate.
Yeah, and funnily enough, particularly if they're highly leveraged, because if interest rates are going to go up, if they're highly leveraged with long-term bonds, I mean, the best thing during inflation is to have a big mortgage, because you want to take on debt. I mean, one of the ways to protect yourself against inflation right now is to take on debt. Issue bonds instead of buying bonds. Issue bonds. So as an individual, the way you issue bonds is by taking on a mortgage, right? You basically issued an IOU to a bank, and if let's say you can get a mortgage right now for 3%, and inflation goes to 5%, you're making money every year. You're gaining. So I remember in Israel in the 70s, people got mortgages, and then inflation went to 1,000%. Basically, they paid back their mortgage with one paycheck, because it became worthless, right? Because it's fixed. It's not inflation adjusted. So leverage is very attractive before inflation starts, as you enter a period of inflation. Anyway.
Couldn't agree more. But my actual question, which is sort of a comment which you can then respond to, or continuation of an earlier discussion, but something I thought of and just want to say out loud and get some feedback on is, Deborah and Dan, you expressed that, frustration about penetrating the culture and spreading the ideas. And Yaron, one of your conclusions was that we need a moral revolution, a replacement of the code of morality before we can really see those changes. And in my own awakening, when I read Atlas Shrugged 10 years ago, and probably like a lot of people, I thought, wow, I'm hearing somebody else say out loud everything which I instinctively or subconsciously already thought and believed. And like, here it is, game over. Like, this is, the answer is right here. And then I was curious, like, what would a person be like who read this and rejected it? And I expected maybe to just hear some emotional reasons, but I couldn't really anticipate hearing things based on logic. And some of the things I ran into were things like, well, that's true for you, but something different is true for me. And then I go, metaphysical. So for me, 1 + 1 = 2, but for someone else, 1 + 1 = 3. And another thing I heard was, well, you have a very analytical personality. I know things instinctively or, through my intuition. And then boom, that's epistemology. So, and those two things feed into ethics and morality. And those aren't flashy topics, metaphysics and epistemology. The average person probably doesn't even have a solid working definition of what those terms are. And it's harder to get people excited about those. So if you go into, if you have a flawed, just kind of vague idea of those two things that you just got through osmosis, through the culture, and they're not deliberate, answers that you've arrived to on your own, then how do you even go into the business of a moral code if you don't have that foundation at all?
So, yeah, I mean, clearly if somebody really has bought into 1 + 1 = whatever I feel like, and there's no objective reality and there's no objective truth, it's going to be almost impossible to talk to them about pretty much anything. Most people don't really hold that. They use that as a rationalization when they don't want to do something, like take Atlas Shrugged seriously. I don't think it's why they reject Atlas Shrugged. I think it's why they explain to themselves why they reject Atlas Shrugged. They reject Atlas Shrugged for emotional, self-esteem, altruistic reasons, but they can't really comprehend any of those. And they would be too destructive to self for them to comprehend them. So they make up, if you will, they borrow from the environment. Oh, anything goes, 1 + 1 = 3, the metaphysics. And I don't think you can change that attitude, the 1 + 1 = whatever I feel like, by teaching them epistemology. I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is that they're evading, because 1 + 1 does not equal whatever they feel like, and they know it, but they're evading that fact. So there's something about, it's not a lack of knowledge, it's an evasion, it's a lack of thinking, it's a lack of respect for their own mind, it's a lack of respect for reality. And the culture supports that. That's the evil that's going on in the world right now. The culture supports that. The culture encourages that. The culture promotes that. So it makes it okay for them to say these ridiculously stupid things, right? Whereas a healthy culture would say, no, I mean, go back and think, right? That you don't have to teach them epistemology to know 1 + 1 = 2, right? Just go back and look at your fingers for a little while. Just contemplate your fingers, right? And so it gets worse and worse and worse because the culture reinforces their evasions, and the intellectuals promote their evasions. So yes, we need a culture in which the right epistemology and metaphysics are taught, particularly the right epistemology, because the right metaphysics primarily is self-evident axioms. That if people don't know reality existence exists, then they don't know anything. And so but we need to teach them how to think but not at the level 1 + 1 = 2. They should know that. That's kindergarten stuff. But a culture that promotes that hurts them. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to agree, but doesn't Ayn Rand's, thing about Kant being the dominant philosopher, he did not acknowledge those axioms that are self-evident, and that's kind of a circular definition of axioms being self-evident. But if he is the dominant philosopher, even if people aren't consciously aware of it in today's environment and through the 20th century, then that's kind of how we have that mental foundation that's just built on sand.
Absolutely. So, okay, so there are two levels at which this needs to happen, right? There's the level of the intellectuals, the philosophers, the academics, the intellectuals more broadly. Those guys need to know epistemology. They need to study it, they need to figure it out, and they need to apply it constantly. And we need to change the universities in terms of the epistemology they have. The average person does not need to learn epistemology, and we should not be teaching them epistemology. We should just be teaching them math and science and not giving them the excuse. What the average person needs is morality. What they need is ethics, right? But we need to change the intellectual environment. So when an average person wants to evade by saying, yeah, 1 + 1, who cares? Somebody slaps him, right? Intellectually. You want to have the people like me, right? The public intellectuals exhibiting a rational epistemology, not teaching a rational epistemology. And the people above me on the hierarchy of intellectuals, right? Knowing that epistemology and teaching it so that there's a constant flow, so it's in the air, right? But so people get a rational epistemology not by studying it, but by studying rational fields rationally. So we need educators teaching based on a rational epistemology. That's how Kant did it. It's not like people read Kant. It's the philosophers read Kant, and that perpetuated this into the culture in subtle ways. But morality is at the level where everybody can actually get it and needs to be explained. Now, basic epistemology like 1 + 1 = 2, everybody should get. And the fact that they're not getting it just means that there's some corrupt intellectuals giving them the freedom not to get it. Freedom's not the right word, but the license not to get it. That makes sense?
It does. And in terms of the public intellectuals, that reminds me of they're a hero to model that behavior. It's just like there are no heroes in on Netflix shows or series or movies or outside the novels of Ayn Rand to find in the form of art something to model oneself after or display these virtues. It's just I just don't see it.
Yep, it's very rare. I mean, there are TV shows with heroes, but it is rare. It is rare. And they're not the ones that get all the critical acclaim. There's Mr. Sunshine, my favorite TV show. Deborah, you're muted. She's been eaten by the turtle.
Hey. Yeah, the turtle got me. Sorry about that. So yeah, I've been thinking about the issue of gender bias and sexism, people's attitudes towards women. And I know there's work to be done there because, for example, someone on the SuperChat from your show a while back, I don't know now, maybe a couple months ago or something, they asked the question, isn't it strange that Ayn Rand came up with objectivism because women generally are not attracted to reason and logic, and something to that effect. But feminism is definitely not, it's got a lot of bad elements mixed into it. And so I wouldn't want to identify myself as a feminist or call a movement to correct those biases feminism. So on the one hand, there's work to be done, and it's beyond, it's more specific than just individualism versus tribalism or collectivism, because there's a certain kind of subset of that problem that needs to be solved.
Mhm.
And similarly with racism and racial bias. But so what do you think about the language to use when talking about something like that?
Well, I
Any
agree with
thoughts?
Cynthia. I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think a lot of men have no concept of how sexist the world was and still is to some extent, although it's much better than it used to be, and how racist the world was, and how it's gotten better, but there's still a lot of racism there. Somebody just said, I mean, this is an example. Somebody just says, name 3 women scientists.
I can.
I'm sure you can. And by the way, the Pfizer vaccine was developed by a woman, a Turkish woman in Germany. It's that, yeah, I mean, that people are thinking in those terms, and people don't recognize it. And yes, there's been a shortage of women scientists. There was a shortage of women painters in the Renaissance and through the Enlightenment. You know why?
Because women were not allowed to do anything. They were literally forced into a role of a domestic servant and a breeder of children.
I mean, there's a famous story. There's a movie about this. I can't remember the name of the movie, about a woman who, the only way she could pursue intellectual is to become a courtesan, is to become a prostitute, basically, because then they left her alone. Then she was outside of kind of society, and then she could go read and she could paint and she could do the things that she wanted to do. And what a horrible choice, right? What a horrible situation. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are few women artists. You find their paintings, but they had to paint in hiding, and they feared persecution constantly. And their paintings were often presented as being painted by a man, and only years and years later was it discovered that they were female. So yes, I think that needs to be talked about. It doesn't have to have a banner. It just has to be talk about the fact that this is the history, and to some extent it's still with us, and that the real place where it needs to be talked about is to young girls, particularly if you look at the statistics. Young girls going into, I think, high school are equal to or further ahead of boys in math and science. And then they drop out in high school. The number of girls involved in, and that's, yeah, the movie is Dangerous Beauty, by the way. The movie is Dangerous Beauty. It's worthwhile watching. So those are the girls that need to be encouraged to pursue what really interests them, rather than to pursue what certain segments of society thinks they should do even today. And the reason there are not a lot of engineers in Silicon Valley who are women is because there's just not enough women engineers. It's not because they're less skilled or less talented. There's just not enough of them on them graduating from schools. And I think that has to do with biases that go back to teenagehood, when we're teenagers. So all of that needs to be worked on and needs to be advocated for, without it falling into the trap of collectivism. I don't think it's that hard. I mean, look at Ayn Rand. The way she did it was portrayed female heroes. I mean, woman running a railroad in 1957 was pretty, good art and just good education. Yeah. And also, but even once I have an engineering, 2 engineering degrees, and even once a woman gets into a career after school, she'll encounter a lot of attitudes that you can't do it, or just assumptions that she's not able to do certain things, and certainly not to be a leader in such a field. And so I think that's where it has the most impact in my mind, is just limiting people from pursuing the most important value in your life, your career, and being told over and over again that I know you can't do this, even if you know that you can. Yeah, it's a horrible injustice, And the only thing I would suggest is just, and I'm sure you do this, it's just stand up against it and voice your opposition. I think that's the best activism you can, and you pave the way for, you know, younger women who are going to come after you. I think that's how women got as far as they have today. And there is a real part of my hatred of the right, of the new right, of the kind of right, new right, is the extent to which they are sexist and racist.
Yeah.
It's just ugly. The way they talk about women and the way they talk about, you know, minorities is just horrific. And it's so reactionary. It's so going backwards, that it's just offensive. And at least the old left, the new left is all, you know, women are supposed to hate men and you know, all whites are racist, you know, but the old left, the kind of the more traditional liberals, at least really did believe in some sense of equality in the appropriate way between women and men and between the races, you know, color blindness and sex blindness when sex blindness is appropriate. Sometimes it's not, but when it is. So, yeah, it must be horrible to have to deal with that and to know that it's sometimes under the surface because people are afraid to bring it out. So sometimes you can't just stand up against them because you don't even, you know, they don't give the opportunity to, because it's under the surface.
It's usually under the surface because they know better. If somebody just, I mean, every once in a while, someone will just make an explicit comment and then it's like they're giving me a gift because there's something I can really do about it.
Exactly.
But most of the time it's not. But on a related issue, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for objectivism in this. There's sort of a subset of, I don't know if you'd call it feminism, but there's almost like a cottage industry around supporting women's professional development. Like people sell books like Lean In, for example, by Sheryl Sandberg. That's one of the most notable ones. And they're all giving women advice. And this advice inevitably turns to things like, well, you don't have to just always sacrifice for your husband or your kids or whatever. It's okay for you to take care of yourself. But then they'll go on to say, you're not being selfish if you take care of yourself. And I scream back at the audiobook, like, I am being selfish when I do that. And that's a good thing. But in a way, some of this about trying to support women and encourage us to be active in our careers and successful is about, you can't do that without saying assert yourself and be selfish in some sense. And they try to straddle this fine line of like, be selfish, but call it something else, and don't really be selfish, but we still value altruism, but you should advocate for yourself and advance your career.
The whole self-help industry is like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, pursue your dreams, but don't be selfish. You know.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So there's a massive opportunity for objectivism within the self-help world.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure how to do it, but somebody should do it. You know, it's just not. You know, as I said, you know, my viewership of my channel drops when I do self-help type stuff, and rises when I do economics and politics, which is, you know, not as much fun for me, at least the politics part of it. But that's the reality of the marketplace. The marketplace doesn't want me talking about self-help. So somebody needs to do it, whether it's, I don't know, Gina Golan, or somebody needs to be the self-help guru coming out from an objectivist perspective. There's a massive, and part of that would be to talk about minorities, to talk about women, to talk about what it is to be successful, because and how to stand up to for yourself. All right, we got Emmanuel just joined us, so jump in there if you've got a question.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is on topic.
There's no topic.
Feel free to ignore this.
Okay. End of the show, but go ahead. I've got a bunch of.
Yeah, sorry, I'm late to the party. I would love to ask you a question about inflation, if that's all right. I'm econ undergrad, and studied the quantity theory of money, and spent the weekend refreshing my understanding of how Fed policy actually creates inflation. And the question to you is, I guess my understanding is that the conclusion I arrived at is increasing the money supply only causes overall prices to go up if that money supply increases demand for a specific set of wherever that money is injected.
Yep.
So it's possible that money supply is increased, but if it doesn't spur increased demand, then prices don't go up. It's not a,
That's right.
it's kind of an association, not a correlation. Is that a correct understanding?
Yeah, I mean, yes, the demand has to go up. So for example, if you increase the money supply, but all of that additional money sits in a bank account and people decide not to spend it, then it's not going to drive prices up. Or if people take all that money and decide that they're going to buy GameStop stock, then it's not going to, it's going to affect the price of GameStop, which it did, right? But it didn't affect other prices. So yes, it ultimately boils down to demand. But the whole issue of money is complicated because part of the question is, what is money, right? And what is used as money, and how do we measure the money supply? And I'm not sure we know how to measure the money supply any more than we know how to measure inflation. It's very tricky. I talked in a few shows back that when the Fed buys bonds, is it increasing the money supply, or is it just changing from one type of money to another? And it's hard to tell, particularly in a zero interest rate environment. Now, if interest rates start going up, the world will change quite significantly from an economics perspective.
It certainly seems really difficult. I mean, some commodity-based money, whether it's the gold standard or whatever the market would dictate as the commodity of record, is something we all advocate for. But it's not necessarily the case, which is why we haven't seen rampant inflation yet. It's not necessarily the case that if M1 or whatever whatever variable people are using to measure the money supply goes up, that it immediately means prices in aggregate rise.
No,
which is
I mean,
why
after the financial crisis, a lot of the money that was created landed up as reserves, bank reserves at the Federal Reserve. So money just went back to the Federal Reserve. And a lot of the way in which the Fed created money was by buying up bonds. Bonds, if you think about bonds, particularly government bonds, so zero risk and zero interest. Bonds are like money. They're just another form of money. You can use them to buy stuff. You can use them for collateral for stuff. You can use them. They're not considered risky, and they're just like money. So in many ways, by exchanging government bonds for cash, the government wasn't actually increasing the money supply, I think. So the fact that it sat at the Fed, the fact that they didn't really increase it, and the fact that generally the pressure on that productivity is increasing because of globalization, pressure on prices is downward projecting, all of that leads to there not being really much price rising. And then you've got the whole issue of how to measure the CPI and all that, and whether the CPI is a good measure or not. So it's a complex, the whole thing is pretty complex.
Turns out economics is hard.
It is. It's much harder than what you think is, but from a philosophical perspective, it's easy. Freedom is good. Just free it all up. And and you filter that through, it still works, right? When you get the complexity of economics, it's still true. That idea of freedom is still true.
Thanks a lot.
Sure. All right, let's do some of these super chat questions. We'll try to do them fast. Other than environmental impacts, what are the biggest externalities that should be concerned about the lead to market failure? Yeah, I don't believe in market failures. I don't know what market failures mean. What is any more than, for that matter, what is a market success? People fail, people succeed. Market fails because they don't live up to some central planner's beliefs, right? Or imagination, or by what standard? By what, some utilitarian standard is it a market failure? So, I can understand. So other than environmental issues, I don't really think there are any externalities in that sense. And even environmental issues, almost all externalities, environmental externalities, are internalized through private property. So private property solves most clean water, clean air issues. A good rights respecting government and private property and a solve those problems. And therefore, they're out. So I think the whole externalities literature and the whole market failure literature is wrong. There's a lot of government failure, but there's very little, they're company failures, they're whole industry failures, right? So what? Right? Failures, the whole industry can go bust, like buggies in the early 20th century went bust. Typewriters, anybody have a typewriter? Typewriter industry went bust, right? And you can imagine the whole industry, I don't know, there was a industry failure in developing the Ebola vaccine. They didn't do it fast enough. Enough, what does that mean? Fast enough. By what standard? Fast enough. By the standard of some people died because they didn't get it. Yeah, but because it takes time and it's an achievement to create a vaccine. But other than, I don't know what a market failure really is. It isn't anything real, in other words. All right, have you gotten on Clubhouse yet? Lots of objectivists on there, could encourage debates on ideas with non-objectivists and get exposure. Seems to have some security issues though. Yeah, I've been on Clubhouse once or twice. All I need in my life is another social media platform. It's really, I'm missing that. I don't have enough to do. I don't understand. I guess if my income from the Iran Book Show was 3 times what it is today, then I could just sit around and be in Clubhouse all day. And that might not be a bad thing. So make sure to contribute to the Iran Book Show. And let's see if we can get my revenue to the point where I can afford to spend time on it. But I actually, beyond doing the Iran Book Show, also work for a living. I just don't, and I have a wife and I have a life. I pursue all kinds of values. I just don't have time. Now, Lex Friedman, I've heard, is sometimes on Clubhouse 12 hours a day. I mean, good for him. And I think he makes a lot of money through his Patreon account. And this is what he does in his life. And that's fine. I have nothing against that, but I haven't found the time and the mental energy to get organized around Clubhouse. So I'm there. If you guys want to invite me to do something on Clubhouse, send me an invitation. If I'm free, I might join you. But for now, I'm just watching it from afar and watching it evolve. And like this morning, I went on a few and not objectivist meetings, but others, and they were pretty boring. So I dropped off. So no, and Lex Friedman was one of them, but it was all in Russian. They were all speaking Russian. So he does it in multiple languages. So I thought I should start a group to do it in Hebrew. And then I thought, why? Why would I do that to, what would be the goal? It's like, it would be cool. But other than that, it would be no meaning. Anyway, yeah, I can't, if I did this full time, I'd have to be on Clubhouse. I don't know, Eric Weinstein, I thought had a full-time job, yet he's on Clubhouse all the time. I think he doesn't have a wife or a life other than his job and social media. All right, did you see Prager's interview with Craig Biddle? How would you handle Prager's question? Would you rather live in a world with God and the idea of a useful delusion, God, the practical delusion? I know that there was, I skimmed through the interview between Craig Biddle and Prager, but I was asked about this yesterday, and I don't want to comment on other people's interviews. How would you handle Prager's question? Would you rather live in a world with God and the idea of a useful delusion? I didn't hear the question, so I don't know how the question was phrased. So God is a practical delusion. I think that is bizarre. I think it's particularly today, maybe you could make that argument 2,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago. Maybe you can make that argument before the Greeks, but I think that is a bizarre. So you're telling me that it's in my survival interest to be blinded, to have part of my brain taken out, to be detached from reality. I think it's insane. It's nuts. I wouldn't have said it's insane, Prager, if I was there, but I would have been outraged by this idea that it's a useful delusion, and that I know where this comes from. It comes from I think Yuval Harari, who is spreading this idea out there that reality doesn't matter. What matters is the stories we tell ourselves about reality. And by the way, Jordan Peterson has, in a sense, this is an aspect of his idea, that is that we create these, and I think the Weinstein brothers buy into this. We tell ourselves stories in order to avoid certain things that if we didn't tell ourselves the stories, they would be really, really harmful. God is not just a story. God is a big story. God is a story about every aspect of my life. God is a story that kills and has killed. I mean, one of the ideas that I did see this segment. So again, this is not Manor's criticism of Craig. This is just how I would have answered the question. Prager goes on and on about how many people were killed by atheists, communists, and fascists. I would, first of all, not have accepted that they're atheists, but put that aside. You got to turn that around and ask, remind Prager what the Jews were commanded to do on the way to Israel, coming out of the Sinai desert. Kill the Amalek, every man, woman, and child, so not a beast among them will remain, not a seed among them will remain. No seeds. That wipe out whole people in the Old Testament. And then what the Christians did to one another during the 100-Year War and the 30-Year War, the bloodiest wars per capita in history, more than communism, more than fascism on a per capita basis, in the name of Christianity. So you've got to attack, in my view. I would have attacked. You can't accept this notion that, oh no, people embracing the Judeo-Christian morality, a peace-loving, law-abiding, wonderful human beings that throughout history have led to great advancements and have great achievements of humanity, and we wouldn't be here if not for Christianity. I say bullshit. Christianity has slowed down, has held back human progress at every step of the way. And if I can say something about Judaism, the Jews who are productive, the Jews who have made a dent towards greater civilization and greater success, the Albert Einsteins of the world, the great Jewish scientists, the Nobel Prize winners, the great Jewish artists, whatever. The Jews are really great Jewish bankers. Pretty secular, all of them. That is, to the extent that you are fundamentalists in your religion, to that extent you contribute nothing to human progress. Right? So really, religion is not this benevolent force out there that, we're marginally improving on. We've got to even more benevolent. No, religion is malevolent. Religion is dangerous and destructive and a killing machine when it's taken seriously. Now, it was tamed by the Enlightenment, primarily in America, but tamed by the Enlightenment. Good for the Enlightenment. But that was a secular movement, not a religious movement, the tamed religion. So, yeah, so Prager sitting there presenting religion in this, I think he got away with too much. I would have been a little bit more aggressive. Anyway, that's me. I think you would have expected nothing less. As an investor, who or what should I be concerned the most as a force of wealth destruction going forward? Well, government. The SEC, new regulations, restrictions on short selling, restrictions in the marketplace, restrictions on debt, just government restricting our ability to trade freely, or forcing exchanges to behave in ways they shouldn't exchange, or forcing Robinhood to do this or that, to disengage with Citadel or whatever. Politicians at this point, I mean, you can improve financial markets significantly, but at this point, politicians should just stay out of it because nothing they do will be positive, and yet they will do something. Seems like Prager was saying the average man is too stupid and needs comfort lies, not to lie and initiate force, disgustingly platonic and paternalistic. Yes, and Prager's exactly that. Exactly that. He is the philosopher king sits on a throne. And by the way, the neocons, which is a whole movement among the conservatives, mostly Jews, but also Catholics, are big on that. That's their whole view. Most of them are atheists, but they are big religionists when it comes to you, because you're too stupid to live by your own values. So you need religion in order to rein those murderous, instincts in. That's what religion does. That YouTube episode on secular talk with Kyle Kalinske, leftist healthcare facts, was excellent on your part. It sure got a lot of dislikes. Yes, I am proud of all the dislikes some of my video gets. Those are all of his fans coming over to my website to watch it. Should altruist libertarians at least deserve some credit for recognizing that virtue cannot be achieved through coercion? Not if they're anarchists, because at the end of the day, coercion is their means of exchange. So not if they're anarchists, but yeah, I mean, I have no problem giving them some credit. I just don't think that's the issue. Coercion is not the issue. The issue is altruism. I mean, coercion is an issue, but it's not the issue. Once you embrace altruism, coercion is a sideshow. It will be embraced. Yes, a few libertarians will hold out, but what difference does it make? It's meaningless. What's the morality of securing an SBA loan to start a business? I'm against government loans, but my competitors vote for and use it. Everybody uses it. There's no way to get a small business loan, almost no way, unless you get an SBA loan. It's the way the system is made up. You didn't create the system, but for you not to use the system would be ridiculous. I mean, every time you go to a bank, you're using a government loan in a sense, because the government backs up all banks through deposit insurance. When you put your money in a bank, it's guaranteed by the government. So what, you're not going to use the banking system? You can't, in a mixed economy, pick and choose. You've got to pursue your values. And you're driving on roads built by taxpayers, by government. You can't live by that. You have to just go out there and make the best choices you can based on what your business requires and what you can do. I mean, don't advocate for SBAs. Don't advocate for government building roads. But once they're there, use them. Why do collectivists attack the right of self-defense? Well, because they don't want you as an individual standing up for yourself. They want it to be a collective effort. They want everybody to vote on whether you should be able to, who is right in the circumstance. But they're not about individuals. Right to self-defense is about the individual's right. And they don't get individual rights. What's the picture behind you? That is Vermeer, the geographer. There's another one, a sister painting to this, called The Astronomer, but this one is the geographer. One's in Switzerland, one I think is in New York. I think that this one might be in New York. No, this one's at the Louvre. It says on the poster. This one's at the Louvre. This is a contemporary. His name is Lawson. You can get his stuff at Quint Cordaire's gallery. Quint Cordaire. Just do Quint Cordaire gallery in Google and you'll get the gallery. And he has a lot of paintings. Some I like, some, I like this image. I like it also because the Twin Towers are there. Brian Lawson, thank you, Brian Lawson. I couldn't remember his first name. Brian Lawson is, and it's called New Height. It's got the Twin Towers in there, which I think symbol for me. I remember 9/11, and 9/11 was important. So to me, that it's an inspiring painting. But Brian Lawson is his name. You can find his work at Quint Cordaire's gallery, and there's a lot of this. Somebody says they will wish I convert you onto good abstract art. In painting and sculpture, there is no such thing. it's a contradiction in terms. Art has to be concrete because plastic arts, the painting and sculpture. The only abstract art, really the only abstract art is music. Music is the abstract art. All right. Where is this world where women are told you can't do it, aren't supported? Give me a break, you're on. The main injustices these days against men. You know, you should dress up as a woman one day and go out there into the workplace. I'm not saying that it's everywhere. I'm not saying that it's all the time. But if you think men have it hard, then yeah, there's certain issues like in marriage courts. But even you know, I've heard stories both directions. I've heard where the courts are very pro men. I've heard where the courts are very pro women. It goes in both directions. But yes, generally women are favored in certain parts of the culture. But when it comes to most work environments, when it comes to school, when it comes to cultural support, particularly if girls want to go into math science and things like that, there's a massive difference. Still is. A lot better than it used to be. But I know there's a whole movement out there of men who think they're screwed and who think women are screwing them. And I mean, not screwing them. That's the problem, I think, primarily with these men, is they're not getting enough. But that somehow the world is, and I know that most of the people who watch me on YouTube are men. It's like unbelievable. It's like 95% of the people who watch me on YouTube are men. So you're more likely to do that. But you just heard from Deborah. Deborah's not making this up. She's not inventing this. She's living it. So you can, assume that it just is what you want to believe it to be, or is what your favorite commentators tell you it is, or you can listen to somebody who's actually living it and experiencing it. Again, she didn't say, it sounds like she's pretty successful and she's advanced and she's done pretty well for herself, but there are these roadblocks set up for her here and there. Anyway. Somebody said I was being funny unintentionally. Yeah, most of my humor is unintentional. When I try to be funny, it's a disaster. You can disagree with Deborah, but you can't. You should disagree with Deborah, sure. But of course you can. But you should listen. You should listen to people's experiences. That's where you learn, not from abstract knowledge, but not just from abstract knowledge, but from experience. And you should listen to what women have to say about their experiences. And you'll probably learn something. I think listening to people you disagree with is an opportunity to learn. Doesn't make you weak, and it doesn't mean you have to agree with them at the end of the day, but you should actually listen. Everybody can disagree with Deborah. Deborah is not an oracle. Somebody says, can other women disagree with Deborah? Yeah, other women can disagree. Can men disagree with you? I don't think so. Thoughts on Dahlia's all-weather portfolio and risk parity strategy. Would it be good for dealing with inflation? I'll have to look it up. I'm not sure what Dahlia's all-weather portfolio and risk parity strategy is, so I'd have to look it up. All right, everybody. Thank you. We've done 2 hours, a little over 2 hours. Thanks, guys, for joining me live. By video. Thank you guys for staying with the program for 2 hours on the chat and on YouTube. Don't forget to like the show before you leave, and you can support the show on youronbookshow.com/support. You can support on Patreon, Subscribe Star, and if we get enough support, then I promise to do more Clubhouse. All right, everybody, have a great rest of the weekend. I will be back tomorrow evening, I think. Right. Bye, guys.
Bye.